Thank you all for joining us today. We are here to talk about pallets, do a bit of a pallet 101 and how that relates back to sustainability choices and really kind of focusing in on that tie back to the bottom line and supply chain resiliency. I'm Jess Bonsall. I am the Sustainability or ESG Director for 4840 Solutions, and I'm here with my colleague JR, our Chief Strategy Officer. Chief Strategy Officer. We'll start off with a little bit of an introduction and kind of jump into things. I do want to give a quick shout out to the AI presentation before. So this is our first time leaning into AI to do presentation work, so it's kind of fun. Thank you to our amazing marketing and communications director for that. So you'll see that AI tie-in in the background the entire way through. JR, you want a brief introduction?
Thank you, Jess. Welcome, everybody. So before we dive into it, I think it would probably help if we gave you a little bit of context on who we are and what we do at 4840. So we're obviously a pallet company. We think of ourselves as so much more than just a pallet company, though. We have a vertically integrated business where we provide full service solutions to the nation's largest retailers and manufacturers. We solve problems in the supply chain. And that's through pallet recycling, which is one of the biggest services we provide. Also pallet sortation, labor services, and then customized pallet solutions. So I'll take a few minutes just to talk a little bit about our brands, and then we'll get more into pallets within the industry and within the supply chain. So 4840, as I mentioned, we are the market leader in pallet recycling and total pallet management services in the US. We also have a brand, Paramount Pallet. Mr. Mark Sura here with Paramount Pallet. They provide pallet management services within Canada. And then Relogistics is our brand that's dedicated to retailers. I'll talk about Relogistics in just a minute, but Relogistics provides on-site services, labor services, to the largest retailers in the country, and they're part of our vertically integrated business solution.
Very cool. So, JR, you mentioned vertically integrated, which I always think is an interesting term. Talk to us a little bit about what that means and how that sinks into supporting return and the overall reusable and resilient supply chain.
So, our value chain is designed to provide end-to-end services to our customers. It starts with us acquiring a broken, used pallet, which we call cores. Ultimately, then we will either sort through that pallet, we will repair that pallet, and then in the end, we will provide a high-quality, finished good pallet back to our customers so that they can then ship their products, usually downstream, ultimately into a retailer DC operation. That's where Relogistics comes into play. Relogistics will provide on-site labor services to handle the pallets and other stuff, as we like to call it. Relogistics will then get those pallets back to where they need to go from a retailer or a pooler, and it just starts all over again. The cycle starts all over again. Very
cool. So we're here to talk about Pallets 101, right? And kind of really better understand a pallet. And I know pallets have been around a long time, and it might be interesting if you're a history buff, some fun facts. Talk to us a little bit about the history of the pallet industry.
So the pallet as we know it today was first introduced in around the 1920s. And it's not a coincidence that it was introduced at around the same time as a forklift. The forklift and the pallet are very much tied together. And 1939 is really, World War II is really when the utilization of pallets exploded. We had a logistical challenge across the globe, which we had never had to tackle before. And the wood pallet really helped move supplies across the globe with World War II. So that's really where you saw a huge increase in utilization. 1940s, 50s, that's when standardization happened. And specifically here in the US, the GMA, Grocer Manufacturer Association, they really pushed standardization of the 48 by 40 pallet. And into the 1970s, that's really where you saw an effort to further cut costs and further improve efficiency within the supply chain. And that's whenever the recycled wood pallet became much more popular. So 2000s really is when larger companies started to, again, sort of the third evolution of an effort to improve efficiency. Larger companies started to centralize decision-making and really look at their whole pallet program. And from a sustainability standpoint, what that did for the pallet industry is it gave us a lot better data and information that we could ultimately utilize to tell what's a very dynamic sustainability story.
No, that's awesome. I think particularly being here with the Reusable Packaging Association and getting lean into sustainability is always exciting. You talked about the history of the pallet and how long they've been around. Tell us a little bit about the size of the industry.
It's big, right? There's over 2 billion pallets in North America alone. And so it is very diverse and it's vast, right? And what's interesting is that 90% of those pallets are made out of wood. So, the wood pallet really does dominate, as any of us who have been in the grocery distribution center or a grocery store, or just, looked out back behind a grocery store know. But, the other 10% of the market is made out of plastic and metal pallets, predominantly. And we have seen a lot of growth in that over the last sort of decade, if you will. I'll say, so one interesting fact when you think how big is the industry, how big is the market? If we were to take all of the pallets in North America and stack them side by side, we would circle the globe close to 60 times.
60 times.
So it's big. That's a lot of pallets,
awesome.
Right?
That's awesome. Yeah, so 60 times around the globe, 2 billion units in circulation. What does that mean in terms of standardization? Do you see pallets all over the place? Do you have to deal with variation in the industry? What does that start to look like?
Well, there's a lot of variation within that, right? We could go and there's a lot of aspects that we could talk about for a long time, right? When you start to get into the minutia of the different pallet types. But from a standardization standpoint, it's no accident that the name of our company is 4840, and the most standard, most popular size within the United States is the 4840 pallet, right? And so in Europe, you've got the Euro pallet. Asia, you've got the Asia pallet. And so that makes up a big percentage of the market in all of those regions. I will say that a couple of shout outs is that standardization has not been easy over the years. So shout out to the NWPCA, National Wood Pallet and Container Organization. They have been instrumental in helping push standard specs and standardization of the 48 by 40 size pallet within North America. And so amongst their many other contributions to the industry. PDS, which is pallet design software, that's a software tool that is actually owned by NWPCA now. And not all supply chains are created equal. Not all supply chains have that standardization. Well, when it's a complicated custom supply chain, PDS is the software that really our industry has used to design custom solutions for the most complicated supply chains. And we have a team of folks who are able to work in that software and design those solutions. And then finally, RPA, right? The RPA obviously is our gracious host today, but the RPA has been instrumental in telling our story about sustainability. There's a great story to tell. And so I just want to thank the folks at the RPA for supporting us and really leading the charge and telling the story about sustainability in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to, I'm still kind of mind blown about the 2 billion pallets, right? 2 billion pallets, 94% of all consumer goods are shipped on a pallet, which is absolutely insane. So we talked about standardization. There's got to be a ton of different pallet types out there. What does that start to look like?
So again, a lot of complexity here. I'll keep it simple, right? There's really four main types of material that are used in a pallet. The first would be plastic. Right? Plastic, ideal for high velocity, closed loop supply chains. Second would be metal, heavy duty machinery. It's a very durable type pallet in high temperature environments. Third would be paper, super lightweight, eco-friendly, great for air freight. And then finally, the fourth is the wood pallet. The wood pallet is really the most versatile. It's used in supply chains from retail all the way to construction.
Yeah, interesting. So I want to go back. We talked about four things I understand, right? Plastic, wood, metal. You mentioned an open loop or closed loop system. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means? And as I think that'll help influence some of the things we're going to talk about later.
Yeah, so a closed loop system, really it's defining how much control you have of that pallet or that product as it travels through the supply chain. So a closed loop system and maybe the most aggressive form would be shipping from one end of a building to the other. Ultra closed loop, you've got control. It's underneath your four walls from point A to point B. You know, as it starts to progress, you may have multiple warehouses. It could be in the same city or in multiple states where warehouse A, warehouse B, you own and control the operations, and you're shipping a product from warehouse A to warehouse B. Still closed loop, you have control over it, but less closed than my previous example. And finally, as it gets into an open loop is whenever you start to lose control of that product and that pallet. You own, warehouse A, you're shipping to a customer at warehouse B. That's when it really gets into an open loop system. And as it continues to ship, down the supply chain, going to maybe a retail store, that's where you really get into an open loop type supply chain.
So you talked about open loop versus closed loop, the right type of pallet for every system. As the sustainability lead for our team, I do want to give a nod to the wood pallet. So you'll see up on the slide, there's this little bit of a call out in the loop that we talked about before, the repurpose piece. And the repurpose piece is important, particularly to me, but also to a lot of other folks, because repurpose starts to focus on how much material is being reused when it comes back to the company. So we think of that as yield. Yield is something that our operational teams actively track. And that starts to look at when JR mentioned purchasing cores from a company, they're going back into the supply chain system. That reuse piece is in the yield and the repurpose. 94% of all of the pallets that come back to a 40 facility are repurposed and reused. And 94% yield. Really, really high reuse factor, which is something we absolutely love about wood pallets. Many other really great things, but we're not here just to talk about wood pallets. We're also here to talk about the pallet industry more broadly. So, Jared, tell us a little bit about the market conditions you're starting to see that are influencing choices about pallets.
So there are a lot, right? I'm going to talk about four. And as you mentioned earlier, 94% of all consumer goods are shipped on a pallet. So it should not be shocking to us that the number one factor is global and regional, economic trends. The pallet is a leading indicator of what's happening and going to happen in our economy. And so we very frequently will see trends play out in the pallet market that we ultimately see play out in the larger economy later on. So that's number one, global and regional economic factors. Number two would be the growth of e-commerce. And so in the world of e-commerce, the objective is to get the product as close to the consumer as possible. And so, that means more dots on the map, that means more products, and ultimately that means more pallets. And so I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but the second factor is definitely, I think, the growth of e-commerce and that business. Third would be the availability of raw materials, right? That's not unique to the pallet industry, I think. The cost and availability of raw materials is something that impacts a lot of markets. I think what is maybe a little bit more unique to the recycled pallet industry is that we have a finite amount of broken pallets that we can acquire and buy. And so, that really does influence our market. In late 2021, where we had, everybody knows, right, that we were dealing with COVID at that time. We had an explosion of e-commerce, which was one of the many factors that created an explosion in demand for pallets at that time. And so, we saw that there was not enough supply. There was not enough supply, ultimately resulted in pallet pricing being higher than we've ever seen in at least my lifetime. And then fourth would be sustainability. So, there's been a growing focus on sustainability from regulators, from our customers. And so sustainability has really been something that us as an industry, we've leaned into heavily over the last decade, but even more so probably the last 5 to 8 years.
So, outside of the sustainability piece and tying things back, how then, with all of these different options out there,
Yeah.
all the different solutions, how do you go about picking the right pallet for your team?
So it's something we talk about a lot, right? And I would boil it down to 5 factors, right? So first will be pallet load requirements. You need to understand what's the weight of your product, what's the size of the product, what's the value of the product, what's the packaging of the product. So if you're shipping apples in a plastic RPC, then a plastic pallet is not the right decision for you. If you've got a product in a box where it needs to be supported on all 4 corners of that box, you want to make sure that you're getting a pallet that's standardized enough that is going to support all four corners of that box. Things like that from a pallet load requirement standpoint, that's number 1, right? So number 2, I would say, is supply chain dynamics. Velocity of the product. How quickly is that product moving through your supply chain? Is it a closed loop? Is it an open loop, right? The more closed loop the supply chain is, the more likely you are to want to look at buying a pallet, investing in something that's more durable, right? The transportation weight, which, if you're shipping a product that's going to weigh out on a trailer, then you may want to consider the weight of the pallet and get something that's a little lighter so that you can put more product on that trailer and maximize your transportation cost. And then other handling requirements. Do you need to rack this pallet? Do you have somebody later on in the supply chain that's going to have to hand stack this pallet, in which case you may have a maximum weight in which that pallet can actually be in order for somebody to hand stack it. So that's the second. Third, standardization. Does the pallet have to look, feel the exact same every single time? How standard do you truly need that pallet to be? Look, it's going to be a certain size, right? But do the deck boards have to be an exact certain width every single time? Can it have chip backs? Can it be imperfect? How important is that to you? You really need to understand, do you have automation that's involved? How important is standardization going to be in your supply chain? So that would be the third. The fourth is sustainability, right? Make sure that the sustainability associated with your particular pallets that you select is aligned with your goals and your customer goals. That's a fourth, and that's important just to make sure. Look, there's a good sustainability story, I think, for every pallet type, but some are better than others, and so you just want to make sure that that is aligned with you and your customers' goals. And then fifth is the one we probably talked the most about is cost efficiency. So a whole lot of details there in cost efficiency, which you can talk about. What my advice would be to focus on the cost of your total pallet program. So one component of that is your initial acquisition cost or rental fee, right? That upfront cost. That's the easiest. Everybody sees that. But understand that there are additional costs in the supply chain that also need to be taken into consideration. So I'll talk about that a little bit for each of the pallet types. For a plastic pallet, if you're going to acquire a pool of plastic pallets, understand that you've got to put some money up front and acquire that pool. It doesn't matter how closed your supply chain is, the more closed it is, the more it helps you, but inevitably, pallets are going to be damaged, they're going to be lost, right? So you will have maintenance costs on that pallet pool, moving forward in subsequent years. You have to buy a pallet pool that can support your busiest times. So if you've got a 20% increase in volume during the holidays, that pool has to be big enough to support that 20% increase. And then you also have to consider that if you've got two warehouses and at some point you're going to have too many pallets at warehouse B and not enough over at warehouse A, and so you're going to have to rebalance that pool. But if you need something that is durable, and a lot of times plastic can be an attractive option. If you're going to rent a pallet, you've got the rental fee up front. But you also need to take into account any of the admin, any of the compliance costs associated with that. You may have additional cycle time charges associated with that, and then you are still responsible for that pallet if ultimately it gets lost. And then on the just one-way wood pallet side, recycled or new, it's especially on the recycled, it's oftentimes the most cost efficient from your upfront cost perspective. Just understand that it's not going to be a standard, and you're going to have to give up some standardization, and understand that it may not be able to hold as much weight, and so you need to confirm that it can work within your supply chain before you go for the option that may be the cheapest up front.
And it may not be really pretty either, right?
Oh,
not pretty, but it still works.
They're pretty to me.
Yeah. There you go. So we talked a lot about choosing the right solution, and as we get to the bit, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of pallets in the supply chain. What does that start to look like?
So there's a lot of neat stuff that people are doing, and they have been for a decade, right? Like there's RFID tracking and temperature sensors and that really are geared today towards, I think, niche applications, niche supply chains. That's not because of the pallet, right? I genuinely think that the pallet is along for the ride to a certain extent. I say that and say that the pallet's the easy part. It's the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure to be able to record this data that, in my mind, is going to drive innovation over the years. And that infrastructure is not cheap, right? And there's been a lot of innovation on the pallet side, I think, over the years. And there's been innovation, on the infrastructure side, no doubt. But it's whenever major retailers, major manufacturers decide to invest in that infrastructure, whenever the data that these pallets can deliver on their supply chain becomes more valuable than the investment required on that infrastructure, that's when we're going to see a big change, I think, in the industry.
I like that you draw back to data because especially when you think about sustainability and reuse, being able to count, being able to understand and look at that impact becomes really, really valuable, right?
No doubt.
As we were talking, we had an AI presentation before. We've got AI in our presentation here. Where do you think AI starts to tie into the future of the pallet industry?
You know, it's going to, if I kind of talked about the history and, 2000s where there was the next kind of evolution of centralizing decision making and it's very, very possible that the next one of those evolutions becomes AI, where we look to utilize AI to drive efficiency with overall supply chain, but that certainly would have an impact on pallets as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we've got a little bit of extra time. So I would love to open it up to the audience, see if there are folks that have questions, things you want to tee up to JR. Of course, if you're feeling shy, you can also find us at the 4840 booth behind the Learning Center. But any questions? Any thoughts? Oh, here we go. There's a mic headed your way.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, I'm Ray with Sensital. So CHEP is the dominant player in this space with the open loop pallets, right? So my question is there something natural in the pallet industry that the bigger will keep getting bigger? Like, of course, you can think of cost efficiencies, but beyond that, is there something which we don't know which causes the number of players to reduce over time?
That causes specifically to CHEP or just? I mean, look, the pallet industry is going to grow sort of with the overall economy. As we look to, as efficiencies are achieved, a lot of times that means less pallets are needed to support the overall demand, right? As if you think about, and I don't want to say inefficient, but you think about the growth of e-commerce, right? You may look at the growth of e-commerce and say, there's a lot more dots on the map. Well, that's more efficient for them. That's required more pallets. As decision making is more centralized within a lot of the customers, as their needs become greater, they need more customized solutions. I think it naturally limits the number of providers which are able to meet those needs. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be a place there's thousands of pallet companies in the US, like thousands, right? And so we work with hundreds of pallet companies because, look, we've got 68 locations in the US, but you can realistically, only ship a pallet, let's say, 150 miles. And so it's a big geography that really can never be covered, I think, by one company or a handful of companies. So we all work together to a certain extent and utilize each other's network to hopefully provide the best and most cost-effective solution to our customers.
Yeah, and I just to add on there too, I think Jared mentioned the partnership piece, right? So there are a number of small pallet companies out there. What makes the pallet world successful is where we get the opportunity to partner and collaborate. And while in one space, one might think there's acquisitions, all these companies are going to get gobbled up. At the end of the day, they're that independent ownership and leaning into the small businesses where they have that really kind of unique footprint and market coverage, and then having the opportunity to partner with them leaves that space and really helps keep the industry itself open and a bit more diverse, and really helping each other out, that partnership piece and leaning into each other. So thank you. I'm watching the clock. We've got only one more minute left. And so again, if you'd like to chat, connect to the team, we're just behind the RPA Learning Center. Appreciate everybody's time today. And thank you for coming in and a listen.
Thank you.